Hello, muchacho.
Hola?
Maybe.
Good. Sounds good to me.
All
And I
right.
didn't wear a Hawaiian shirt because some of our bros were throwing shade at me.
Yeah, I
for
may
being
have to
like an
update.
old man.
May have to update the title slide. Yeah, they were accusing you of living in a retirement community in the villages in Florida. I think.
I'll own that. Dude, sign me up, man.
Sounds like fun.
Like play some tennis, sit in the hot tub.
Hey, they have organized activities. That's sweet.
Heck yeah, play bingo, eat dinner at 4:30.
I love shuffleboard. Yeah.
Yep.
So okay, good show. All right, see you next week.
Yep.
No, what are we talking about? What are we talking about today?
I think we're going to talk about threat hunting a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. JARM, which you started doing some research. This is one of these. I think you were watching football over the weekend on television and simultaneously researching this threat hunting approach, which those who know you, Aaron, will not at all be surprised to hear that. I don't.
Who doesn't want to do math and watch college football at the same time?
Me, but
I get lost in it.
Yeah. So tell us. Well, okay. We'll do our. That's what we're talking about today. We're talking about this
threat hunting and probably JARM.
Yeah, using maths. So should be fun. Cool.
I like that. I was really short and there was no music.
Yeah. So what is a JARM, and how would I know if one ran into me?
Can we step back from JARM for just a
second?
Yeah,
of course we can.
And let's talk about threat hunting a little bit. And I'm going to disclaimer: we know a lot of people that are way better threat hunters than me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give the idiot's version of threat hunting today, if that's okay.
Okay.
Is that a fair disclaimer?
That's totally fair. That's the you know who you are, but if you're one of our homies that actually does this work, mock us privately, not publicly.
Yeah, right. Please do it over single threaded text messages, not in public.
I'm talking to you, Brian Carter.
Yeah, Brian, quit being like that. So I have a little, not so much a beef with threat hunting, but just maybe a concern. And I want to air that a little bit, and then we'll get into JARM, because I think this context matters. Okay. So
you're scaring me. We ticked off all the CISOs 2 weeks ago. Now we're going to tick off all the threat hunters.
No. I don't think we're going to tick off the threat hunters. My hope is that they're like, yeah, Shaver, he's got our back. Maybe they won't. They'll be like, he's stupid. But I get that. So we work with tons of people, right? Do this, get into like, hey, we should probably look into this. Right. And I feel like to the less initiated in threat hunting, there's this perception that like we're going to walk up to a burning building and there's going to be this clear picture that something bad is happening, and we're just going to call the fire department, our incident response crew, and they're going to come in and put the fire out, right? And it's
going to turn on water hoses and straightforward. 10 minutes later, fire extinguished. Yes.
And we're going to be like, it's here and it's definitive, and it's this like binary black and white situation.
It was this fuse box right here that was the definitive source.
And the point I want to make is, if we've gotten that far where the structure is fully engulfed, so many things have gone wrong in threat hunting to get to that point. And yet there's that perception, because when we're doing threat hunting, to me, it's more like smelling smoke, right? This isn't a fully engulfed structure. That smells like an electrical fire.
Yeah.
We should investigate. And I want to add that piece. Do you get that same sense from people too, that they're like, Well, it's just smoke. Why would we do that? We'll wait till the building's ablaze.
Yeah, correct. I've seen in a lot of organizations that there's well, are you sure it's on fire? Are you sure there's a fire? Either there is a fire or there isn't a fire, because you're the firefighter experts.
Right.
And I don't want, there's also a desire in way too many organizations of, I don't want to get anybody up out of bed. I don't want to raise a concern unless, like, essentially it's the don't call me unless it's on fire.
Right.
It's kind of another sort of challenge in there. And, that in particular, when we talk about threat hunting, is a challenge. And I'll do my own sort of, ran a threat hunting team at a really big organization, or, I led the organization that had a threat hunting team at a really big organization. And I think about it in most organizations don't have this luxury of threat hunting, just, oh, by the way, but in a larger organization where you have multiple security roles, if you think about the SOC, which are people who follow a script and have a little bit of sort of creative control, but essentially they're looking for known things, oh, hello again, Ivan. It's another piece.
Right.
Another piece of your malware that we know all about.
There's pre-written signatures, IOCs, that we already, like, if this happens, the fire has started.
Correct.
Yeah.
And in my experience, the threat hunters are not that. They tend to be higher up the food chain, and they are very creative. And they're the people, like, I didn't have to tell threat hunters what to go look at. I would have been capable of it. But it'd be more when you read some weird thing that happened to some other organization that was like you, the threat hunter would be the one that would say, that's really interesting. Yeah. And I'm going to go find out as much as I can about that. And I'm going to see, could I detect something that looks like that in our organization?
Right.
Or what are the precursors of our fire example?
Exactly. Yeah, we're like
smoke,
heat, pathologists, right?
Could I detect it with smoke? Could I detect it with heat? Infrared heat signatures?
Well, and even we're getting into the, is this like smoke that's coming in from the window because your neighbor's having a leaf fire, or is that your electrical panel that's starting up? And so I want to set that context that threat hunting in Shaver's small world is more like looking for smoke and heat that's pre-fire. And that takes a different discipline of this is not, we found smoke, go pull the fire alarm and get the legal
and
team,
send 10 trucks. Yeah.
Get incident response, right? This is this merits further investigation,
right?
And that we start to actually build a case around it. And I want to talk about that. And we're going to talk about JARM as a way of finding smoke, and then when to maybe write it off as a false positive and when to dig in, and how we build a threat hunting capability that's about establishing a hypothesis and then digging into that until the point where, like, somebody go pull the fire alarm. Right. And there's got to be a process that's in there. And I think that's a gap in a lot of organizations. It's this all or nothing thing. So,
right.
So as you were making fun of me about watching the Michigan State Spartans, they're my team.
Poor thing.
Just opening myself up to all kinds of abuse here.
Well, I'm an Indiana University fan. So, it's been a rough couple of decades other than last year.
And, like any good doobie, I'm building this database of assets that I have fingerprinted, and I'm close to 300 million assets over 5 years, six years
that you've scanned.
Right. That I've scanned. Yep. Some of them are inside organizations. Some of them are outside. And, I was like, I need a bit more data here. So I was like, my favorite place to get data about assets, Brian?
The interwebs.
The interwebs. Mm-hmm. I was like, you put it out there, I can scan it. So I decided to scan the country of Costa Rica. So I did, because I like Costa Rica, and Just figure
You're just hoping and praying that you find somebody that you need to have a conversation about with there, maybe in person.
Yeah, in person on a beach with Anyway, so we get into some of the scanning that we do. Every one of these 300 million assets or so that we've got here in our database, we calculate a JARM fingerprint for it. And I had a positive match on a JARM fingerprint this week that matches the known JARM fingerprint for Cobalt Strike, which we'll maybe get into a little bit later.
Yeah.
But we should probably talk about a JARM fingerprint and what it is and how we use it. Do you want to explain it?
I'd be better at the Cobalt Strike. You're going to need to talk about JARM, because when you called me to talk about this stuff, I'm like, yeah, kind of like I said, not kidding. I had never heard of JARM before. So it was new to me. I quickly went and did some research, but I'll let you roll with it, actually.
Yeah. So JARM is a technique that we use to fingerprint an asset.
JARM, J-A-R-M.
J-A-R-M, yep. And we can look at it a little bit. I'm going to stay away from the math because I don't think that's necessarily that cool to people. But essentially, we use JARM to fingerprint an asset. And specifically, what we're fingerprinting are any ports on it that respond to TLS. And what we're doing is there's so many different ways that you can configure TLS. And the way TLS responds in its fingerprints, we run 10 different TLS queries essentially to it. And the way they respond helps us enumerate, without it telling us specifically, what operating system it is, what, based on the ciphers that it's running, blah, 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 all this stuff, right? That if I take a Palo Alto firewall and I know it's a Palo and I know it's configured away and I've got 10,000 of them and they're all configured the same way, they'll all respond with the same JARM fingerprint. Okay.
Right.
Then what I can do is I can take that JARM fingerprint where I'm like, I know that's a Palo Alto box configured this way. I can go enumerate devices on the internet. And when one responds with a direct match for that JARM fingerprint, it's a very high likelihood that it's also a Palo Alto box with that same known configuration. And so through inference,
these, by the way, would change with software versions, would change
Java version, TLS version, the cipher that you're running. And so
in the case of web servers, if you built it and compiled different packages in different orders, it would change the fingerprint.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
So there's a lot of detail in this. It's not foolproof. There are false positives to it, but that's where we start saying, building a case around it. So if I fingerprint a box with Cobalt Strike on it, and these are public, right? There's Salesforce, our Betty HD Moore, that really get into this kind of publish a database. Shodan has a published database of malicious and non-malicious JARM fingerprints. Okay, we have ours as well that we use, but it helps us understand more about the assets that we're working with without having credentials and without having insecure ports open. We're using secure ports that have no known vulnerabilities necessarily to make a really, really close guess at what it is and what it's running. Is that a fair explanation of JARM?
Yeah, I think so. I would also say part of what's great about this JARM utility is that that the good folks at Salesforce had a previous similar approach for these JA3 fingerprints, but you had to have other tooling. Like you had to be in the middle of a conversation between a client and
you needed
server.
to look at headers and footers and the setup and tear down of a TLS session. Yep.
And most of us, even inside of our own organizations, we don't sit, again, the number of organizations where I can sit inside of those handshakes and see those patterns. Again, a very large, a Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 company or a 3-letter agent, you might be in a position to, to see all of those happening. But to me, the cool thing about JARM is it provides a utility where it can do that very quickly.
You don't have to sit in the middle.
You don't have to sit in the middle. You can run your own handshakes against services. And as you did, I can say hello to the country of Costa Rica and see JARM fingerprints of different things that I find there.
Yeah. So let's talk about, so now that we kind of understand the concept, and it's a 64 character alphanumeric string. And we probably don't need to know any more than that right now.
Yeah.
But what we do is when we're looking at assets is we look for known malicious fingerprints, and we triggered some, and we were like, bingo, right? Because that's fun. That's what we're looking for, smoke, and we're doing it across massive scale environments without, kind of manual labor with each one of them. So it's like finding a needle in a haystack. And so I found a needle, and I called you and said, "Is this a needle?
Or is this smoke?
Is this smoke?" Yeah, let's not switch analogies.
Yeah, can we all agree that this is smoke?
Can we agree that this is smoke?
Yeah. Then this to me is the, I'll use yet another analogy. There's this thing that looks like a duck and quacks like a duck. Then, the reasonable thing to do would be, well, then assume it's a duck.
And do some more investigation.
Correct. Yeah. There could be other explanations, but,
so then we start looking at additional information about the asset. Because now I want to build a case, right?
Yeah.
Of, this is a little bit of, maybe subjective. This is not a smoking. I can't use all these. This is smoke. We'll just stick with that one. It's smoke. Let's see if there's other sources of smoke. So we start looking at, is that TLS fingerprint that I found on the ports that we usually find it on with Cobalt Strike? They typically show up on a particular port. Not that they can't be customized, but there's data that we know about it. And the answer was yes. It was also showing up on that port.
Yeah. And we should, by the way, at least quickly say there are folks who listen that say, "Oh, Cobalt Strike." Like when you said the words Cobalt Strike.
Yeah. Explain that.
Yeah. Like that to me, that's calling and when you say Cobalt Strike, I had a shiver up and down my spine because those are not good words to hear. And so there's this concept of in our security world, there's sort of run-of-the-mill malware. There's just, your standard malware that comes in every day. Mm-hmm. And then there are things that are more like low frequency, but
APTs,
high risk, or, very often those all are also APTs or advanced persistent threat. Advanced, and these are not run-of-the-mill and very often are either really sophisticated criminals or are state-sponsored organizations. Persistent, meaning they avoid detection. They've figured out ways to sit on computers all over the world and be persistent there and not be detected for long periods of time. And so Cobalt Strike, the most recent one that people would remember, the whole SolarWinds software supply chain attack. I mean, that was a Cobalt Strike. Was the one of the particular pieces of malicious software that was embedded inside of that. That was the bad stuff inside of the SolarWinds attack that made so much news.
Well, and I think it's important as we build the case around the smoke to think of that. Like, is this run of the mill malware? Because there's an intended purpose with just your average malware, and that is, I'm probably going to try to take some services offline or destroy data, and get a ransom out of it.
Right.
APTs that are sophisticated, like kind of what we're working on here. That's not their intent.
No.
In fact, their intent is to remain silent as long as possible and exfiltrate data.
Just hang out. Yeah. Persistent.
Yeah. Yep. So we start to build a case, and that's where we become threat hunters, become like a detective, of it. Again, it's not this, is it on fire? Is it not on fire? Let's start to build the case. So we have the JARM TLS fingerprint. That's some supporting evidence. We have that this runs on the same TCP port that we would expect to see it on if it was a standard Cobalt Strike APT. Then we look at, some maybe a little bit more subjective, where it's not enumerating the environment, but the NSA just in July released guidance warning organizations about a particular threat actor who loves to use Cobalt Strike to exfiltrate data. And so we kind of add that into the case file. And then we look at who is that threat actor that likes to use this, and they name the Chinese government as part of that. Okay. Right. Well, what is the server role that this is filling in the environment? And we look at that is a server role that is even more suspicious, that adds credibility to the fact that government threat actor and this server role would probably be the most likely point for us to go after.
Right.
And so we kind of built a case around it and said, this merits further investigation. And then we have to lay out kind of a bit of a strategy where we're not quite to incident response, but we're trying to test our hypothesis about this, because you're not going to go download malware bytes and run a scan on this, and it's going to be like, you did it, you won. Yeah. Because if the IOC was that clear, it would have been caught by, the endpoint security that's on it, or the firewall or something.
Well, and to this point, when I said shivers up and down my spine, I should specify there more. Cobalt Strike, TrickBot is another one. There are things where when you are in a large, sophisticated organization, there are just certain things where you realize my endpoint security software is very often not going to catch those things, because those toolkits, they're recompiled every time they're deployed in an environment. They're encrypted. They tend to do tricks of running in memory versus having the malicious code sitting on a file system. There are all sorts of tricks that those APTs use to not be detected.
Yep. So then we say, okay, I feel like there's a supporting case to this. It wasn't just like one whiff of smoke that we got. We're starting to see some credibility around this. Mm-hmm. And so we want to kind of test our hypothesis. So we take and build a server and build it from a brand new, not from the gold master, like straight up from the ground in a sandbox environment, and then re-fingerprint it. Because that's going to tell us, if we lose the fingerprint, then maybe this was a server that was acted upon by an outside force that has added this.
Inside of that particular environment.
Yep. This is specific to this organization.
Right.
And we also look at, is this just one server that's fingerprinting? In this case, it was, half a dozen-ish. Is that the totality of the servers that fill this role? Or is that a subset of the servers that fill this role? And start to build that out.
Yeah.
And we were able to rebuild this server, and it fingerprinted identically right out of the gate without ever talking to there was no opportunity for this thing to
matches the Cobalt Strike fingerprint.
Yep. Matches Cobalt Strike.
Yeah.
So then we got to ask ourselves, did we just disprove our theory, or is this a supply chain attack where the software that has been installed, this third-party software that fills this role, does it come with this fingerprint built in? And obviously it is. And is that because we just have a happenstance that it's fingerprinting the same way? They happened to use the same TCP port as Cobalt Strike, or is there something in their supply chain? And because we've already seen this in the SolarWinds supply chain, and We know that Cobalt Strike is a preferred tool used by the Chinese government. And this is a supply chain that would be very, very high value to them.
Yeah.
That kind of increases our suspicion about what
we should say too, by the way, matches, the false positive is not a common thing. I think reading the Salesforce's research, they said they had found, that they had like scanned the internet for Cobalt Strike.
But it's possible to have
Right.
a false positive. It's
Right.
just, as you start adding all this supporting evidence around it, you're either gonna become more confident that this is a hit, or less, that it was just happenstance.
They didn't give the exact number of false positives, but the number of matches they found on the entire internets wasn't millions. It was thousands, and you got the sense that the false positive rate was maybe in the hundreds, out of scanning the internet, essentially.
Right. It's going to be less than 10% ish, I would guess, and that's just a guess, right? But based on what I can tell in the research that I've done, and our database, which is considerable but not immutable, right? There's a lot more than 300 million devices out there.
Yeah.
So then we start, kind of digging in further there, and it's like, okay, well, let's let the sandbox server run wild and see who it calls home to on the internet, and set up debug logging and make sure that we're doing traffic capture, etc., and try to poke the bear just a little bit and see what we can get out of it, and then really log that traffic and take, what was interesting about this particular asset is that within the first 10 minutes, it made 150 unique calls out to the internet. So we deduplicate that database of IPs that it talked to and run a reverse scan on them. Are any of them matching the Cobalt Strike fingerprint, which they weren't. And half-ish, just over half, resolved to legitimate traffic. But what that tells us is I'm not able to resolve all of this to legitimate traffic. A portion of this, I am not able to tell you who it goes to. I can tell you that this is going to a container in AWS or Azure or GCP, and that there is no DNS resolution associated with it. And that raises more questions.
Yeah.
And so the whole idea, especially around an APT, is that we have to really build a solid case around it. And then, and now we've engaged the software manufacturer as well, who's doing their due diligence process on it as well, which is why we're not going to talk about who it is or what's happening, because there's more that has to be done here.
Or even definitively say there's a fire somewhere in the world. Yeah.
And the reality is you're not going to be able to definitively say there is or isn't until there's some concrete proof with it. It's all just really kind of building a case about whether this is a thing or is not a thing. And, if this was like, hey, Aaron, this is our Minecraft server, we would be like, punt it. Like, this is probably not worth our time to do all of this stuff, right? If you're like, this is our ERP and we believe it's embedded in the, OEM software, like, well, the stakes are a lot higher.
This contains all of my intellectual capital, or this contains all of my banking information, or all of my patient records. Yeah, then you might
the stakes are a lot higher. And so all of that goes into building this case around threat hunting, about how much we invest in tracking it down. At the end of the day, this particular organization may or may not have a definitive answer about if this is a Chinese APT until we have a data set spread across multiple users of this platform. And that's something that the OEM is going to have to go track down.
Right. Yeah.
But this is a way that we can relatively simply hunt across massive remote environments to find signs of smoke, and then work to prove or disprove those before it ever becomes a blazing fire of APT or malware. And so I think this is going to become it's not going to be a silver bullet, but it's another tool in our toolbox to do widespread, large-scale threat hunting without sitting in the middle of traffic. And it's kind of cool. And it's really fun to be able to do that.
And we're at our 30 minutes. I'm going to go just 1 or 2 minutes more and say, I always bring my perspective. Like when you called and, and I had never heard of JARM before and, started looking at it, started talking about it. I'm like, oh, what? This is super cool. And it's super cool in the security threat hunting use case because it is very hard to get to the level, like to detect these kinds of things. As I said, you're not going to run an antivirus scanner and find them. And usually for an organization to find stuff like that, you're pulling together bits and pieces of, like, I've got full network packet captures, and I'm pulling that together with, I've got endpoint detection and response, and I'm pulling together, what is the activity that happened on the system, paired up with, what was the activity on the network, and who was that activity going to, and what do we think about the trustability, the level, in the cyber world to have another alternative.
You had to burn a
lot
of calories.
Of calories burned to even have a guess of, not is there a fire, but is there smoke that I have to follow up on. Most organizations don't have the resources to do that. But my other point would be this low calorie approach. There are other, not even necessarily threat hunting things, we didn't even delve into here, but just realize to be able to fingerprint and know that there are differences between these two servers or commonalities between these two servers.
You can look for configuration issues amongst your TLS.
Huge benefits. Servers that should be the same, to be able to fingerprint and say, these are not the same without having to log into them. That's a big deal. Or this is a Google server, or this is a Microsoft server, or a Facebook, to be able to do that stuff, not just based on IP addresses.
But who owns it and what packages it's running.
Yeah, who set that server up that way. That's
security configuration management
Yeah.
is probably more impactful even than threat hunting. Have good configs before you start burning calories on finding threats.
So, people that are, if any of that is things that like, oh, that's interesting to me. Salesforce created this tool to create JARM fingerprints. It's kind of a one-off, this server, this port, go give me a JARM. We know, you mentioned HD Moore, we're doing some work with the Rumble scanner. And Shodan, I think, is doing some JARM fingerprints now too.
There are folks trying to bring this to a at scale
to the masses, essentially,
of JARM fingerprinting to the masses.
Yeah. But if any of that this is one we're always, if there's something in that space of, hey, I think I need my assets scanned for these, either internet based or inside of our organization. Reach out. That's when, we can give some pointers or help people out with that. Because it's really, like we said, low calorie in a cool way to look for these sorts of things that are normally very, very hard to look for. Cool.
Well, hopefully we did justice to our threat hunting bros who are actually good at this stuff.
I'm sure we'll find out very quickly.
Yeah, no kidding. All right.
Good talking to you, man.
Good talking to you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.